to a report from the Federal Reserve back in February of 2024. 44% of that is going to be real estate assets. So this is the perfect show to have that conversation. I'm your host, Chris Berg, head of business development with Abernathy Holdings. We go out and build Class A self-storage sites in California, Arizona, and soon to be beyond. Our guest joined us today, a friend of the show who's been on before, Mr. Jeff Gould, president and founder of Lineage Asset Advisors. Jeff, great to have you back, my friend.
Great to be here. Thank you, Chris.
I'm very excited. A friend of his, he introduced me to recently, and I think we're going to have a great conversation about. She is the president of Orca AG, got an extensive background in finance, Charmaine Tang. And Charmaine, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me as well.
So I want to jump in, obviously, into Orca and some of the problems that you're solving for your real estate families. But Charmaine, first, just to give our audience some context, some background, just share with us a little bit about your history within the world of finance.
Sure. Thank you. My background, it goes back many moons, 25 plus years in finance. First half of that spent in New York City, background in investment banking and equity capital markets, spending time actually in the tech boom, working on deals, a really exciting time to be in the market. Pivoted upon moving to Dallas, Texas, into private banking and working with complex families, many of which were real estate families here in Texas, as well as oil and gas, entrepreneurs, founders, etc. So really exciting space. And I think being able to meld capital markets knowledge with human/family dynamics knowledge, as well as you're alluding to, succession and all of the things that go around that, has been great. I joined Orca nearly 2 years ago. We are a 7-year-old company headquartered in Zurich, Switzerland. Our home base here in the States is in Dallas, Texas, but we do quite a lot across the gamut. Real estate families, again, as one of our main areas, as well as family offices and the like. What's common about the Orca client is that they have quite an extensive ownership, either in a single asset class or across asset classes, and we help them get organized, or as we like to call it, organized.
I like that. Real quickly, because I want to focus on some case studies today and some of the problems that you're solving with Orca, and Jeff yourself as well, and what really excited you about Orca. But Charmaine, for you, you've got this extensive background in finance, and my understanding of your story is you saw Orca and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. This is going to solve so many problems for past maybe clients you worked with. What is it, or what was it about Orca that you just went, okay, this is incredible?
I'll try to sum that up in a second. Orca is incredibly visual, and again, I was actually at a very large global private bank, and I just saw the issue that clients were having in general was understanding truly, what do I own? How much do I own of it? What legal, tax, and compliance issues do I need to address for all these complex assets? And the world is getting even more complex. The types of deals, the types of jurisdictions, et cetera, et cetera. And so it just, Orca was kind of ripe to happen. What Orca does, when I saw it, it's a visualization of your ownership structure. So think like an org chart, but actually a lot of people like to call it org chart on steroids. So what you would see is for example, a client might own various asset classes held through various trusts and different companies, and to be able to not only calculate and visualize the ownership, but also to understand it from different perspectives, whether it's from the company perspective, the heirs perspective, the beneficiary, et cetera. So for me, it kind of blew my mind, because I could see firsthand how much time would be saved, how much institutional knowledge could be captured, the accuracy of that information, and then the ability to share that information across parties. An interesting statistic, I shared it a lot today, actually, in various calls, was that the average family, a large one, will have something close to 25 different advisors. So imagine that on one side of the table, and then on the other side, all the family members. That becomes quite complicated also from a communication standpoint.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a few ruffles behind, closed doors and things like that. And Jeff, I think that's where you want to come in, where I really, for people that aren't familiar with you, Jeff, I know I mentioned you've been on the show before, but if you want to give you a little bit about your background, what you do at Lineage Asset Advisors. And I think most importantly, because you've been working with so many families for so long, my interpretation of our conversations, you're like, hey, Chris, I've been trying to find a solution, couldn't really find one. And then all of a sudden Orca popped up and you're like, this is what I've been looking for.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Second time guest. Honored. Thank you.
So am I. Thank you.
Yeah, very honored. So yeah, we provide, succession planning services, advisory, asset management services for real estate families that own privately held real estate across the country. And, we're dealing with not only the operational inefficiencies within the context of succession planning, but we're also dealing with the financial and family dynamic kind of elements of how to develop a succession plan with real estate portfolios. And obviously with tangible assets like real estate, it requires active management. And when you have active assets that require active management, it requires a deeper level of planning with regards to succession across the generations, because oftentimes there's misalignment in our world between the wealth creator and what they've built from a real estate portfolio standpoint, and then the beneficiaries and what their aims are with the real estate. And so pulling all of that through, I actually attempted to hire a software developer to actually try to build a digital representation of an org chart for families, and quickly realized how complicated and how many variables could come up in that process. And so I pivoted and started looking for solutions, because one of the key aspects that we do, and where I think, this conversation gets interesting, and it was amazing to connect with Charmaine because of an immediate aha moment where the ability to visualize these complex relationships in a real estate portfolio and a wealth portfolio for a wealth creator becomes like really the key piece of the puzzle to start the planning discussions. Because getting organized is where a lot of families fall short. If you don't really understand the relationship, or you're coming at a conversation from a place of a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding of those relationships, then you could trip up on the emotional, the family dynamics side of things. So really clearly understanding those relationships from the top down became kind of a critical piece of the puzzle for my business. And then it was a kind of a revelation to connect with Charmaine and the Orca tool.
Yeah.
So,
If I could chime in, actually, I'm smiling at the comment. Relational and relationships is actually the heart of Orca, and Jeff really articulated it beautifully. It's not just the visualization, but the interplay of the different parties, their relationships. So perspective, relationships, but also really seeing it all tied together. So Orca is not just the visualization, but it's also important to validate this ownership, or the transactions that validate and culminate into the ownership percentages. And again, talking about complexity, you see this in real estate often. One of our clients, they have something between a 12 to 15 layer look through, all said and done, and different levels of GPs and LPs for each property, and upwards of 500, 800 legal entities. So you can only imagine those relationships become so multifaceted and multidimensional. Sometimes I liken it to like a Rubik's Cube on steroids.
So walk us through how you visualize now these 500 to 800 entities and the different GPs and LPs. And are you also sending out K1s to those LPs through Orca, or how extensive does it get?
We don't send out K1s to them, but we do have the ability to collect them. So the way the software works is, for every entity or legal person or anyone involved in this ownership structure, we help create, I call it also, sort of in American terms, a very secure Swiss digital vault, so to speak. So imagine not all 100,000 documents you might have within your real estate company, but the key ones, right? The ones that, if something happens to you, you own the property, it's a deed, it might be a loan document, it's going to be an operating agreement if it's a company. Call it a litany of the must-have documents that you would think that seems so simple, but yet when you're looking for a document and you call your attorney and it's 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, $500 billable later, you're chasing and sort of an administrative web of time, and you're just running ragged on things that are probably not the most value add. So I would say you are certainly able to capture the administrative support, papers, files, things like that in one place. Again, we like to call it like the death by a thousand cuts. No one administrative task is particularly hard, but when you start to sort of aggregate how many of these little tasks, it ends up being a big undertaking and savings of time when you can get this all in one place, a central repository of sorts.
So, Charmaine, for yourself, and let's keep it focused on real estate, but who's your ideal client and what's the biggest problem you're solving for that client?
Yeah, we're in a really interesting secular place right now. Um, what's interesting is that with succession, as well as the advent of sort of generations having to come together between digital natives and folks who didn't grow up with technology, I would say that technology, at least the seat I'm coming from, the biggest thing is the capture of the institutional knowledge and the information and the critical pieces of data to be able to transition that from, say, a homegrown real estate family who just acquired property after property after property and have been running perhaps the same way with a few modifications along the way, and getting to a point where whether or not the children or the next gen is taking over the business, there's still an information transfer that has to happen, and education and knowledge. Um, if that's not existent, you can face governance issues. I think wealth owners need to understand. Well, wealth owners, there's a dynamic, right? If it's a family-owned business in real estate, it's tricky because it's both dad and my boss. On the flip side, there's a lot of taboo also about talking about wealth transfer or estate planning, depending on the family. So what's really cool, I always liken it to several families, the next gen, have approached our company or me and say, hey, we love your solution. Will you join us? We want to show it to our parents or our dad.
Mm.
And sometimes the reaction is quite funny. It's like, you're not going to mess up our stuff. It's sort of this distrust or mistrust of technology. And it's fun to see sort of the next gen say, well, it's still better than you carrying it in your briefcase, Dad. So I'll hear things like that. I also think it shines light on moving sort of, we'll say, analog world, paper, files, things like that into digital realm. This might be a little, silly comparison, but I think it's like the way, it's not silly, it sort of it's the inspiration of Orca, actually. The book is called Everything is Miscellaneous. And the concept of this book that it shares is that we are still filing digital data as if they are in file cabinets, as opposed to the way we think with, so hence the term everything is miscellaneous, right? I may think of something this way and Jeff sees the same thing, but thinks of it and files it a different way. I think that's another huge area. And then third, I think, we are just moving towards, efficiency and remote work and all of these things. And having technology not only save you time, but give you the freedom to move around as families are more and more global. I think that's, I would say, is sort of the third big trend.
Yeah, that's what's really intriguing to me is the aspect of the multi-jurisdictional piece for you guys. I think is really fascinating when you look at what's going on right now with millennials and this out of office work situation that many people are doing. So I want to move on to Jeff in a moment, but real quickly too, you and I had a chance to talk recently, Charmaine, and I'm a big believer, and you even hear Larry Fink talk about, look, everything's going to be tokenized. I don't know when, but we just know everything's going to be tokenized. And the fact that based on our conversation, I think you guys are using blockchain to keep records. And you shared with me a really interesting anecdote where somebody thought they had a major faux pas and deleted some documents. And you're like, oh, we'll just go back to the blockchain. Here they are. Boom, boom, boom.
Yes, I think accountability is a big thing. God willing, you don't have bad players, but you never know. Built into Orca's, we call it an audit log, but essentially it's a blockchain-inspired feature of Orca where everything done in the system is called an atomic action. And should some mishap happen, like deleting 500 files mistakenly, this truly happened to one of our clients. They called in a tizzy and said, "Oh my gosh, can you help us? Can you help us?" And we said, "Okay, John, what time did this happen?" And he says 12:09 p.m. We simply went back into the audit log and reversed that atomic action, and the documents were brought back. So I think that that's a really cool way where technology can really cover human error. I have a similar experience today, coincidentally, a real estate family, and it's just when you're calculating things, drawing things. If you're still doing it manual, again, there's human error, and you want to mitigate that with technology.
Jeff, to you, like I've got my own, I think, perceptions, Jeff, of how I see Orca solving problems for you and your clients, but you're the one that obviously sitting at the desk with these people or at the table. So what would you say is the number one problem that Orca solves for your clients, and how are they going about doing that?
Yeah, I think, well, I think it solves a few problems, but I think the idea of, having static information or static data, fortunately, it's an opportunity, but there's a number of these real estate families, closely held real estate families, private families that have the wealth creator who has established their own hard copy, hard document filing system, with all the information that they think is appropriately filed, all the final documents. But oftentimes the ability to get access to that information, the ability to understand how all of the information is interrelated, being able to put that static information into fungible, data, zeros and ones that is fungible, where you can see the time travel, you can see the transactions, you can share the information with the other trusted advisors. I think one of the interesting things in the world of estate planning and succession planning is that you have these different advisors, trusted advisors that play a very important role in the planning process for family offices. It could be, the estate planning attorney, obviously in their world, the tax planner, CPA, you've got the wealth advisor, financial planner, you've got the trustee, and as Charmaine alluded to, you've got about 25 to 27 advisors, in the room here. And my experience with families is that they spend a lot of money on the planning, and yet that information becomes static, or it becomes trapped in a vacuum, so to speak, with each of the advisors. So how can you have this central repository, have this kind of dashboard view of the relational information with the final documents, and that information can be shared out with the other trusted advisors, and it could save you time, energy, and money in doing additional planning with those advisors as well, or understanding the relationship with your LPs and your GP, those legal relationships. So I think, again, this idea of visualization, central repository, the idea of being able to save time, energy, and money, and operate efficiently for these real estate families. And then, when you talk about succession, oftentimes I will talk to clients who say, "Hey, we've done a bunch of estate planning work or tax planning, and they have these complex structures, right? These complex capital stacks with, debt, equity, mezz, LPs, all these things. And they might have a system like, an asset management or investment management system, but those systems don't do a good job of visualizing. So being able to understand that relationship becomes really critical." And there was one other piece that I was going to suggest. Oh yeah, the instruction manual. So with regards to real estate, it's obviously an actively managed asset class. So what I like to do as part of the succession planning process is develop an instruction manual. So when the wealth creator is no longer here, we have clear instructions as to relate to key personnel, as it relates to transition of operations. We might be in a situation where we have a GP who becomes incapacitated, who can't fulfill their role as an asset manager. And so we need this instruction manual in the interim, or while we're figuring out the buy-sell agreement, to appropriately manage the real estate portfolio. And so having this all in one place is, and having it connected and integrated, and I think we could talk a little bit about APIs, and the benefit of the, that type of solution, this type of solution integrating with other solutions. But we're seeing more and more of this in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, prop tech is becoming more and more prevalent all the time. So, a few things. One is I also got to presume it. One, it seems like it's almost a living business plan you can put together. I can visualize it, what direction we're heading. Number one, so if that's a fair assessment, let me know. And if not, then share with me why not. But two, also because of that and things are laid out. Again, I'm not at the table like you guys are, so maybe you want to take me in the room to the table, but I got to believe it's got to mitigate a lot of family feuds because now it's laid out, it's clear, and it's a conversation that can be had. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
mean,
Because
Charmaine, I'll let you take that one.
yeah, I think, regardless of someone's acumen in real estate or finance, what you see in families is transparency of information, and access to that is key to have a level-headed conversation. I think we see when families, and this is more from my private bank side, when families don't feel they have transparency, that's kind of where the dynamics, the interesting dynamics start. So I think being able to provide that, and from an educational standpoint as well, is really, really important. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jeff.
and just to follow up on that, I think knowledge is power. And
Yeah.
again, this idea of the soft touch of entering this conversation around succession is really coming at it from a place of I understand, my position. I understand if I played things out as it stands today, I understand how what the implications of that plan would be to the beneficiaries, to the trustee, and all the roles and responsibilities divvied up. And once you understand those things and the connectivity between those things, you can have a more transparent, real conversation. And this takes time to develop that conversation, and ideally we have the wealth creator leading the charge on this conversation. But as Charmaine brought up, in some cases, technologies and visualization tools like Orca can be driven by the beneficiaries to the wealth creator. So it can happen in different ways. Other times where I see this becoming prevalent is when you have a wealth creator who has peers who they see the implications of not doing good planning with real estate, and the impact of that, leads to distress and conflict with the next generation. And then all of a sudden they have this aha moment to say, hey, my legacy is not tied up in the wealth that I've created. The legacy is actually tied up in the relationships that I'm leaving behind, and the information that I'm leaving behind. And actually, I want to commit to this process because it is a big part of my legacy.
Charmaine,
Yeah, I was going to add to that actually. We have clients. It's a morbid conversation in a bit, right? But the death scenario, or what we would call the omnibus succession plan, and simulation of that is really important. And that sounds very technical and sort of sterile and clinical, but at the end of the day, when everyone's grieving and it's very emotional and information is not flowing properly, it's not recorded, that's where the really tough stuff happens. So again, we do see this for sure in families, and I think there's a really big opportunity, particularly with real estate and its complexity, to use estate planning and work with folks like Jeff to really bring clarity and a plan around it once someone key passes away.
you've talked about GPs and LPs. I know sometimes as an LP, you might invest into a fund or whatnot, but it can be somewhat opaque. You're not really sure, hey, what's the value of the asset now? What's happening with, the shares or units that I have? So does Orca also continuously value the asset and give GPs and LPs an idea of where it stands? And if so, how often is it doing that?
Sure. We don't set the valuation. So the way where Orca sits, as I say, is an administrative software. But as Jeff says, it connects easily to softwares that calculate performance. Or if you're rudimentary tracking your valuation in Excel, which is perfectly fine, that can be ported into Orca. But the beauty of it is the ability to track different types of valuation, whether it's a tax value, a book value, a market value, et cetera. And you can actually see it across continuum of time. And I think that's really, really important. So with regard to GPs and LPs, where we see this in many clients, is that they may invest in various vehicles at different levels as a GP, as an LP. And being able to not only calculate direct ownership, but effective ownership is really, really important. And it's not that easy. We have a client who, and you'll play this video, but they had 800 properties, and using Excel, having to calculate that manually took so much time, so much time. And I think that the importance of knowing the effective ownership as well as just the outright ownership, direct ownership, is important these days too, because as many of you all know, FinCEN, which is the a legal body, a legislative body that is, really looking to stop bad actors in America in terms of ownership and things like that, shell companies. There's a requirement now to report your beneficial ownership, whether you have a single member LLC all the way to layers of LPGP, et cetera, et cetera. So those calculations are even more critical because there are heavy fines if you do not report that in a timely basis. So it's given a lot more fire under people's hood in terms of knowing those numbers and reporting them accurately and punctually.
Jeff, anything else you want to add to that? Yeah, the only other thing I would add is that the ability for sponsors, you might be able to do this in the investment management systems, but the ability for sponsors to basically, and I don't think you can actually, but to take the LP interest, to look at the LP view, if you have an LP who owns, X% of a property or X% of multiple, entities that own these properties, you can share that link through this system around their ownership percentages. And that visualization, I think, is helpful as it relates to managing your investors, as it relates to being transparent with your investors about their positions in these properties. So, again, I actually went through this today where I am working to onboard a client or get him organized. And we talked about this very issue because he has 55 legacy limited partners within, a multifamily portfolio that's probably close to $100 million. And, he realizes that, those LPs are transitioning, because the legacy LPs are passing away, they're leaving their shares to multiple heirs and it's getting divvied up. And so the ability to track that, in an org chart methodology, I think is really key.
So with that being said, too, I would believe, Charmaine, it's got to open things up to secondary markets, right? Like, for example, if I'm an LP with a GP and I can now show what the valuation is of my shares and or units, for me to go out and sell those in a secondary market has got to make my life and the GP's life a lot easier, yes?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's layers and layers and different permutations, but yes, it does make it easier because of the perspective. You can see it from every side of it, visually and also tabularly.
Fantastic. All right. You mentioned a video. Do you still want me to play that, Charmaine? And then
Yeah, that'd be great. Please do.
Let me bring this up. We'll play a little bit from this. So if you want to set this up, Charmaine, then I'll play.
Sure. What you're about to see is Julie Beaver. She is the VP of tax for a very large real estate family and company here in Dallas called the Billingsley Company. They are avid Orca users. They first heard of Orca, actually. I love to share this story. The principal and I were at a board meeting for a nonprofit in town, and she asked what I was up to and shared a bit about Orca. And she asked, hey, can you come to the office on Monday or Tuesday? And in I walk, and we've aligned the tax group, the legal team, sort of her key folks, the COO. And what you'll see in this video is how much time is saved. They say 85% less time spent on administration, and also with regard to some compliance reporting, in some cases saving a head count or two. So that's a really interesting perspective. I'm excited for you to play Julie.
Charmaine, I feel like you're
enthusiasm.
I feel like you're a movie star, like on the Johnny Carson show, like setting up a trailer to their upcoming film. That was very well done. Here we go.
Yeah. We actually just used Orca to build a report that we've never been able to build that ran the whole company as a whole with all the assets and listed it down through effective ownership. And normally, we've never built that. In 10 years, we've never been able to build that because it was so difficult. I was able to build that report in one day. And now we have it. And it's a visual that the partners are using all the time to look at their assets.
I think it's a little great anecdote to share and give people an idea of the power of Orca. So do you want to comment on that?
Is that for me? Yes. I mean, happy to share that. I think that it, especially for real estate owners, real estate wealth owners, it's a burgeoning issue to be solved, but super happy to show folks the power of it and the magic of Orca.
And then, Charmaine, you asked about the org chart or show Orca. So yeah, if you've got something you can share with me, I'm happy to.
Yeah,
try to
if
set
that's
up
okay, I'm going to show you. Since Jeff and I have been describing it in using our hands, I would love to show this real quick. That's actually how I share it often. So Jeff and I have been describing what we call an org chart. And I don't know if you can see this in blue, Richard Miller at the top. So this is your wealth owner or wealth creator. And what you'll see, Richard has quite a mix of properties, things he owns, a lot of non-bankable assets like art. So you see he has a 50% ownership, and we can actually drill down into the actual asset level. So when you think about real estate, and I think there's two ways that Richard is owning this, right? He can own his real estate outright. So here, it's more his personal real estate, fictitious Richard. He has a holiday house in San Moritz. He's got these houses, etc. But with regard to your question, Chris, if there's a real estate fund and the fund holds properties, it can calculate all the way through. He's holding the fund in a trust, and in the trust funnels over to him over here. And what's great is no matter where you click on this chart, so let me go back to the business trust. If I click on that, you will then now visualize what assets are held in trust, as well as upwards, the beneficiaries of that very trust. So you can see Richard, his wife Sophie, Julia, and Alfie. And let's say we're curious what Julia owns, the daughter, the next gen. We can click and see her perspective. We can say, oh, they have a family business, and we can click and see how that family business holds a portfolio company called Kiva Systems. We can see the accounts related to the family business, and we can see all the family members. As you can see on and on, we can see combined views as well, his and hers charts. We can filter in and out of asset classes. So if we simply want to see real estate, we can do so. And also we can do locations and jurisdictions. So every country you want, any currency, and as well as the not just the asset side, but the liability side. So in the case of real estate, mortgage commitments, loans, interfamily loans, etc. And the last piece is it has the ability to travel through time, past, present, and future. And everything in here, last but not least, it can be documented. So as you look at real estate, we're able to see, we can track all the documents that support, his ownership of this apartment. And perhaps he has more documents to put in, but things like a rental agreement, details around the property can be uploaded. And you can even do this from a human perspective, for example, for Richard. So I'll show you one last thing. I can show this over and over and over again. I just think the visuals are really powerful. So not only do you get a deep dive from a 30,000 foot view to a transactional view, but you can also go into the details of each entity and each person. And people are complex, such as Richard with his various nationalities and his citizenship. We can track all the insurance policies that he's a beneficiary of, or he owns the underlying asset, all of his ownerships, all the way to his powers, where he's trustee, etc. And then, as I said, any documentation related to him can be found there.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, Charmaine. I think that was important for people to see. One last question, just to be respectful of your time, then we'll give you the last word. But Jeff and I were talking about this before you came on, Charmaine, just about, I'd like to know just the conversations with some of the millennials or the younger generations around real estate. And I asked the question because we're actually looking at a small portfolio here in Southern California, and it's a really nice portfolio. And I asked the broker, like, why are they selling this? And he goes, oh, the kids just don't really want to manage it. They don't want anything to do with the real estate asset. They just want to get out of it and, go put the money in tech or travel or whatever. So I'm just curious, what are you hearing from families in regards to real estate assets overall?
Yeah, it's interesting. This comes up a lot with real estate families. So we see the family that the kids are in the business. So a great example is the Billingsley Company, where there are 3 children who had a different part of the business. So one heads multifamily, one is doing retail, and the other one's doing industrial. That's probably one of the more active families I have, where they're actually operating divisions. And then on the other side of it is a family where the kids are more passive. They've amassed a massive portfolio. The kids don't work in the business. And so what's common to all of these is that next gen really, they want information regardless of their roles. And I think those not in the business, there's even that extra layer of questions and uncertainty and wanting to know more. So again, information transfer, knowledge, it's super important. And the last thing I didn't mention, it's the idea of key person risk, right? So a key person can be the person who has the information, and that can be the principal, that can be wealth creator, that can be the right hand of the wealth creator. But that knowledge, will disappear if it's not codified and put in some sort of sustainable technology solution, a repository, all of that work. And I think the other thing we see with these next gen is the question, what is my exposure? I saw this in one meeting where one of the properties was sort of going through something, potentially, litigation, and just not knowing what you're exposed to, and trusting, it'll be okay. I think just the need for information is really critical, because that particular next gen said, I've got to protect my kids. And if I don't understand what I own, that's going to impact my family. So I think it always goes back again to the family and the humans, and protecting the family's legacy, right? The bigger picture. The intention is positive for principals, mom and dad. But what I think is really coming to a head, and this is across companies, industries, is that the tension between control and knowledge and being able to pass that efficiently to the next gen. That's really the heart of this discussion.
It is. And I appreciate this conversation because, again, the mission of the show is to empower people to build generational wealth with real estate. When you start dropping numbers like 100 trillion with a T, from baby boomers to their heirs, again, 44% of that real estate, I think those are some staggering numbers. So, Jeff, want to give you the last word in regards to the conversations around that next generation or millennials in real estate. And then, of course, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, well, I think Charmaine nailed it. I think to double click on that point, the idea around, kind of aligning the generational transition is to get ahead of this discussion around what are the intentions of the wealth creator can put provisions and protocol in place with regards to the estate plan, as it relates to what happens with the real estate, for better or worse for the next generation. You could have residual beneficiaries, you could have income beneficiaries. So the plan does play into what the next generation can or can't do with regards to the real estate in some cases. And I think that, what we talk about with the millennials is obviously there's a menteeship relationship of like training up the next generation to, at least if they don't want to be involved in the family business, but they are planning to retain the real estate, then how do we get you up to speed with how you look at the portfolio, financial literacy around real estate, all of these things. So that's a component of it. And then the other thing is, understanding their goals. A lot of people talk about going from active to passive. Actively managed real estate, a lot of misalignment occurs with actively managed real estate, where the next generation might want to benefit from the cash flow, but might not want to manage the assets. But, it may make sense to go from disposing of multifamily portfolio into passive triple net real estate, but it may not make sense to do that across the board. We may want to have diversification, of asset types and income. We may want to have, a hedge on risk, so we have to pull and push these levers to align across the generations with regards to their goals. And I think that's the key with this is the next generation might be at a place in their careers and in their lives where, they want one thing, but that could change very quickly, with regards to, them having kids or, going to school, so these things can change over time. So we have to be adaptable with this plan as well.
Jeff, always humble. If you want to find more about Jeff, you can go to lineageasset.com. Again, lineageasset.com. Then Charmaine will give you the last word.
Yes, the last word. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Jeff. It's a pleasure. Love working with you. Very excited about this asset class and how it pertains to Orca. Please feel free to reach out. Always happy. Our website is www.withorca.com. And again, thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was completely in alignment with the mission of the show here. So again, I thank you both for taking the time, having this conversation, and please share this conversation with colleagues, friends, and of course, family with family offices. Again, I'm your host, Chris Berg, here at the Commercial Real Estate Report, empowering you to build generational wealth with real estate.